It's the Eagle Community Television Forum with your host, Gary Shorman.
Hi everyone, I'm Gary Shorman and this is the Forum on Eagle Community Television. We record this forum every Monday afternoon out at our Dillon's location. So if you're like some other people that stopped by earlier, stop by and say hi when we're out here. Our guest today is a great guy. He's out with the weather department out of Dodge City, Kansas. His name is Larry Ruthi, and he's chief meteorologist, or meteorologist in charge, I guess is the correct title for that. Larry, good to have you on our program.
Thank you.
And I'm excited about this because weather is one of the favorite things that I really like to look at, not only as flying, but when you look ahead at when the moisture is going to come this way and all that other stuff. You're the weather guy, though. You're the guy that's delivering the news to us.
We try.
Before we talk about all that, how did you get started in the weather business, Larry?
I grew up on a farm in Osborne County, about 60 miles northeast of Hayes, and I spent many happy hours going around and around the field with a 3-bottom plow or a 6-foot one-way. And there wasn't a whole lot to watch other than the clouds and hoping equipment didn't break and fighting insects away. And so I got interested in watching how the thunderstorms developed, how the clouds evolved, and my father would take me out and show me the thunderstorms and explain as best he could how things formed and the outflow boundaries and things that came by. And my mother tried to get us to go to the basement. My father won out every time. And that piqued my interest in the field of meteorology. And so after I finished high school, I went to the University of Oklahoma to take the meteorology.
Well, you and I were comparing notes because I grew up on the farm, and except we had a tractor radio, so I ended up being in the broadcast side. You didn't have a tractor radio.
That's right.
You had to watch the clouds, and it's a great learning experience when you're out there because it does expand and you get a chance to really watch Mother Nature at its best and as it develops. So when you go to Oklahoma State, how do they teach someone to forecast the weather?
University of Oklahoma.
It's a university. Well, we don't want to get that wrong, do we?
No, we're crimson and green.
So how do they teach you to understand the weather and do that?
A lot of it is thermodynamics and dynamics of the atmosphere. We understand the forces that drive the winds, the clouds, the moisture profile in the atmosphere. The wind blows because of a combination of pressure gradient force and the Coriolis force because the Earth rotates and a little bit of friction that gets thrown into it. And the wind varies. We're in a three-dimensional atmosphere, so what happens on the surface, as you know from your flying, is much different at 18,000 feet from what we have on the surface. So the forces that govern all of that are the first thing that you learn in the field of meteorology is why the wind blows and why we have clouds and the moisture profiles and all of the equations that go into the models that govern the atmosphere. We have a lot of, and then the forecasting of it is a lot of those numerical models. We take observations of the atmosphere and we still send up balloons twice a day. Everywhere in the world we send up balloons twice a day to measure the temperature, the moisture profile, and the winds in the atmosphere. And as you know from flying, how the temperature varies in the aloft has a tremendous effect upon the sensible weather that occurs. So icing conditions, we look at moisture and wind and the temperature profile, and we look at all of that to decide what we're going to have on the surface. Is it going to be rain, snow? How unstable is the atmosphere? How rapid is the temperature decrease with height? That determines the magnitude of instability. If we had dew points that were a lot more moisture out there today, we'd have thunderstorms instead of this front coming by that's probably going to be dry as it passes through haze. And so we go into how the thermodynamics and dynamics of the atmosphere work, and then we go into how we model this, and then how we apply those models to what we learned about the real atmosphere and how Mother Nature actually behaves in creating the thunderstorms, the frontal boundaries, the air masses, and the different things that affect the sensible weather that affects all of this.
Well, and to some extent, a weather guy probably doesn't get enough respect because it seems like whatever it is, it may not be right. Weather, though, has really improved to that. You know, you go out and look at that 10-day forecast, and it may not be perfect, but it does give you a pretty good indication of what's coming your way over the next 10 days.
Yeah, 10 days in the future, you shouldn't worry about exactly what the temperature is going to be on this hour, exactly when the frontal pass, but certainly the trends are there. And when I started in this field 36 years ago, we were doing 5-level Baudot code tape. I was typing on a teletype, and our warnings would take of the order of 5 to 10 minutes to create and send out on this slow teletype. And so our verification statistics were not very good. But what we started and what we were forecasting 2 days out is probably as good or better than what it was about what we're forecasting 5 to 6 days in the future now. And we're continuing to improve, and in December we're going to have a major improvement in one of our numerical models we use. We'll go to a 13-kilometer essentially grid resolution. So we're almost into mesoscale on our global models. So it's amazing the types of things that have occurred over the last
How
30
much
years.
better is it? You said you started 36 years ago. How much better is weather forecasting today than maybe even at the year 2000 when we went through Y2K and all that? How much has it really improved?
Back when I started, there was probably 70% art and 30% models, and now the art part of it has diminished quite a bit, so that somebody could come in off the streets out of the university and probably do a credible job of forecasting, just interpreting the models. The things where we can add value with experience is the idiosyncratic behavior of some of the weather that hits the high plains. For example, the Arctic fronts will typically be faster and colder than the models will forecast. And knowing those biases and knowing the characteristics of the unique weather of western Kansas are where we can make a difference on what our numerical models are showing for us.
I really appreciate you making the drive up from Dodge City, but you're based at the Weather Service in Dodge City.
That's correct.
How far do you cover in your weather forecasting?
The area of forecast that we have assigned to us goes to Interstate 70, Ellis and Trigo counties as far north as we go. Goodland picks up northwest of here. We go west to Colorado, south of the Oklahoma line, and east to Pratt, Barber, Stafford counties. Wichita handles south central, southeastern Kansas. 6 counties in northern Kansas are handled by the Hastings, Nebraska office. Topeka handles northeastern Kansas. So we have we have a Springfield office that handles 3 counties in far southeast Kansas, and Pleasant Hill handles 2 counties in far northeast. So we have 6 forecast offices that are responsible for parts of Kansas. And across the United States, we have 122 different forecast offices, each with its individual area that is primarily responsible for. But in making a forecast that I put out that's especially a seasonal forecast or 2 or 3 weeks out, I'm watching what's happening in the behavior of thunderstorm activity in the Indian Ocean. That has a huge effect on how our large-scale pattern varies in the wintertime. For example, now we have a super typhoon that's southeast of Japan that's going to be ingested into the westerlies, and that will have an effect upon how strong the ridge builds into western Canada and how much cold air we have coming down in mid-November. And it does look like we're going to have a pretty good cold snap coming down 10, 11 November, something like that. But that's partially related to that tropical system that's off Japan.
Boy, that's interesting. So you're watching India, Japan right now.
Absolutely.
And start seeing how that develops and brings the cold snap in, because that's one of the questions we'll ask in a minute about what kind of winter we're going to have. Yeah. But when you start looking that way out and you start looking at some of the, we heard about the term the polar vortex, and that seemed to be a media buzzword last year. Are we going to have a lot of polar vortexes this year? Or have we always had them?
We've always had them. The polar vortex is nothing new. There's always a circumpolar vortex that exists because we have the westerly flow in the northern hemisphere. Because if we didn't have the Earth rotating, we'd have this light north wind where the flow would come out of the poles where it cools because of radiation deficit, and we'd have a hot place along the equator. The air would flow down, it would rise over the equator and flow back toward the poles. But because the Earth rotates, and as the wind goes toward the north, it gets closer to the axis of rotation, so it curves toward the west. So we end up with this band of westerlies in the mid-latitudes, and that precludes the rapid thermal transfer. So we end up with these traveling cyclones and anticyclones that bring warmer north and colder south. And the vortex that occurs near the poles, because it's cold there, we end up with lower pressures and cold surface temperatures. And that cold air plunges down in this sinusoidal wave pattern, and where those waves develop and how strongly meridional or north and south the component of the wind is determines how much cold air filters into the United States. For example, if the Atlantic basin is very warm off Europe up toward Greenland, that tends to favor a pattern with a more amplified wave pattern in the polar westerlies, and that favors some place around the world is going to get pretty cold. This winter, we're probably going to have some periods of cold air, like the last cold outbreak we had a few days ago. That was an enhancement of the Hudson Bay low. That Hudson Bay low, there's all the time. It just is there all the time. It just varies in strength, depending on other large-scale forcing mechanisms.
What most people don't understand is they may turn on their local TV station, they may turn on something on the internet to find their weather, but all the weather really bases in your office, and then it gets turned into different types of forecasts and different things, correct?
Yeah, we put out a forecast. There are a number of private meteorologists out there that have access to numerical models, make their own forecasts. If you put 5 meteorologists in the room looking at the same environmental conditions, you come up with 5 slightly different forecasts, because it's not an exact science. And so there's a lot of opportunity for interpretation and application of experience in art. But the forecasts that we put out are kind of generic. We put out a gridded forecast, 2.5 grid resolution. It's available throughout the United States, and anybody can look at that forecast and use it as he sees fit or adjust it as he sees fit. And so we're kind of the base meteorological support. The 5 Doppler radar scan in the sky across the Kansas that you see on the television station, those are Weather Service Doppler radars. The satellites are NOAA satellites that are up there. So if we were to take away all of the government support, all of the NOAA support for the satellites, the numerical models, the radars, a lot of the observations out there are Weather Service supported or FAA supported, there wouldn't be a whole lot to look at, to talk about. On the other hand, the news media are absolutely essential to communicating to people, because we sit in our little holes and we create our forecasts and we send it out on social media, but the news media have so much more access to people to tell them when you should take action, when you should take cover, and what you should do. So the whole process works extremely well when we all work together.
Do you ever look out the window and say, it looks like it's going to be sunny?
Oh yeah, all the time.
You know what, I have 3 questions I want to ask. One, when we come back for a break, we're going to talk about what kind of winter we're going to have.
Sure.
I want to talk about the term global warming.
Yep.
And where that is, and then I want to kind of end up with, what's the best thing to look for in weather. And so we'll ask those questions. Our guest is Larry Ruthi, who's with the National Weather Service out of Dodge City. Back with more after this.
Youthful body, tight tummy, smooth facial lines. Greystone Cosmetic and Reconstructive Surgery is here to help you achieve your goals and give yourself the new look you've always wanted. Greystone offers sophisticated surgical and non-surgical cosmetic procedures. With services now available locally, there's no need to wait any longer. Contact Greystone Cosmetic and Reconstructive Surgery at Hayes Medical Center today or online at greystonecosmetic.hayesmed.com.
It's a beautiful day in our super high-speed internet great customer service neighborhood. Like you, this is where we live. In fact, our company is employee-owned, so it's our goal to improve the quality of life for everyone in our community by delivering faster, more reliable internet, clearer, more feature-laden phone service, quality TV channels, all with the level of customer service you'd expect from people who are your neighbors. Eagle Communications, our community connected.
Welcome back to the second half of our forum program with Larry Ruthi, who is a meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service in Dodge City. If you have any questions or comments, please send them to me at gary.shorman@eaglecom.net. You can also find us on Facebook under ECTV Forum. Click like, and we'll be able to share our programs, some past programs, and also take a look at maybe some programs coming up in the future. Anyway, I'd like to hear from you. Again, our guest is Larry Ruthi, and he's a meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service in Dodge City. Larry's made the trip up today to our Dillon's location for this program, and we went into the break talking about what it's going to be like this winter, because I know you can see out a little ways in forecast, but in general, are we going to have a colder, wetter, hotter, warmer? What kind of winter are we going to have?
If you look on the internet, one can see all kinds of forecasts that are out there. For example, the
old
farmers
yeah.
says
Are there really old farmers that forecast that?
They won't share the mechanism and tools that they use. I believe they use a lot of it based on sunspot cycles and analog years that have characteristics similar to what we have now and what plays out the rest of the years. But their actual formula they use is a secret, and as it should be, it's a proprietary thing. Mm-hmm. Often they do pretty well.
So what does the National Weather Service say? You don't go to the Old Farmer's Almanac and find out that.
I look at it. It's part of what goes into the equation.
Huh? Yeah. So what are you looking at for this winter?
Our official forecast for the winter that comes out from our Climate Prediction Center has Kansas in pretty much a too close to call environment. There are a number of factors that will be affecting us this winter. One is the evolution of an El Nino in the Pacific, and we are warming in the Pacific. It's not a classic El Nino event that's evolving because the whole Pacific Basin is above average, and typically we look for about 120 to 160 west for the temperatures to reach at least a ½ degree Celsius above climatology for the sea surface temperatures. And we're about there, so I think that as the winter evolves, especially as we get into the December, January, February time frame, we will see the evolution of a weak to perhaps at most a moderate El Nino. That tends to favor a cool pattern and a moist pattern across the southern United States with an enhanced subtropical jet and a lot of subtropical moisture feeding across the southern plains and along the Gulf Coast. And a lot of times that will filter into Kansas. On average, if we have a particularly strong El Nino, we tend to have a snowier, a wetter winter than average. And I would lean toward El Nino, especially after the first of the year, tending toward promoting a above average snowfall for this winter.
And that is also helpful for rain this spring too,
Yep,
correct?
it was.
And of course, those are the things we always look at. We're always looking for rain.
Yes.
We want rain without thunderstorms, but yeah, that doesn't really work that way very well.
Not usually. And another factor we need to watch for is how strong, we talked a little about the Hudson Bay low that evolves and how strong it is in the sinusoidal pattern in a polar jet. The Atlantic Basin is pretty warm right now. That tends to favor a pattern that is more sinusoidal with more meridional, more north to south flow, and tends to want cold air filtering into the United States. So I'm thinking the upper Midwest, eastern United States will probably be pretty chilly this winter.
Are you ever amazed when you look at the maps and see how our Earth kind of just makes things happen the way they do? Is that amazing?
I am amazed. I'm in marketing. I'm not in creation of the weather. I believe that to higher powers, and I believe that God controls it. We try to guess what He's going to do.
You talk about the world, and there's been an awful lot of discussion about climate and climate warming and how the Earth is going to end in whatever, a couple hundred years or whatever because of global warming and what's taking place. How much of that, from your chair, is real? How much of it is politically oriented?
There's a whole lot of politics in all of the doom and gloom predictions of global warming. There is climate change. Climate is not a static feature, it's a dynamic feature. Over the millennia of years, there have been huge climate changes that have occurred, and many of them have not been caused by mankind. The thing that's different about this is that mankind is pumping large amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from the burning of fossil fuels. We don't know for sure how the atmosphere is going to respond to that. Many scientists out there believe that we will see continued warming, and many of the very large-scale, long prediction models do predict an increase in temperature over time. But is that necessarily bad? That's the big question we don't know. Should we be spending a large part of our gross domestic product on modifying something that we don't totally understand? Or who's to say that where we are now is the optimum climate that we could ever possibly have? Populations have migrated across large distances because of climate change in the past. Greenland, as we talked about, used to be green 1,000 years ago or so. But now it's more covered by polar ice caps that are starting to melt. But there is, over the last few decades, there has been an increase in the global temperature. But if you look at the very large scale of the last 10 years, it's been pretty flat. And so we don't know for sure whether this is a temporary aberration or whether we will tend to see an acceleration.
A couple hundred years we'll know that, right?
And I won't worry about it.
Just one other thing. Tornadoes happen out here.
Yes, they do.
Is that an all hands on deck when you see those weather patterns start to develop? How many meteorologists do you have down at the National Weather Service to help translate all that?
We have 22 employees down there. Some of those are electronics technicians. We have 3 electronics technicians to keep things going, an IT officer to keep the software running. We have 4 hydrometeorological technicians, and the rest of us are meteorologists. We have 14 meteorologists, 2 meteorologists on staff all the time. When we have a major severe weather outbreak, we'll get as many people into the office as we can. Usually the optimum environment for an extreme event is probably 7 or 8 people working at once, 7 to 8. Sometimes if we have enough workstations, we can have enough space for 9 or 10 people, but about 8 is a maximum that people start to get in their way and it gets more cumbersome, you get too many people around. But.
Well, I know those of out here listening on the radio, because you get distributed on radio, you get distributed on TV, the little weather radios, and now internet is a whole new way to get that information. Do you have a favorite way to check on weather other than your big screens and all the dials when you're just getting up in the morning?
I'll go into the internet, particularly the National Center for Environmental Prediction site. I look at all the numerical models in some detail, and I look at the observations that are out there. The Storm Prediction Center has a very nice site where you can look at observations and get an idea of instability and what their thoughts are on how thunderstorms are going to evolve. So those are probably the first 2 places that I go to look at, and of course I look at our website because I have a biased viewpoint toward what we put out.
Well, very good. So when you're out looking at the weather forecast, you hear it's going to be whatever the temperature is tomorrow and clear skies. This is the guy that is responsible for the weather forecast coming in. His name's Larry Ruthi, and he's a meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service office in Dodge City. Larry, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Gary.
On our program, and thank you for watching the forum. It's brought to you by Hayes Med and by Eagle Communications, our community connected.
Youthful body, tight tummy, smooth facial lines. Greystone Cosmetic and Reconstructive Surgery is here to help you achieve your goals and give yourself the new look you've always wanted. Greystone offers sophisticated surgical and non-surgical cosmetic procedures. With services now available locally, there's no need to wait any longer. Contact Greystone Cosmetic and Reconstructive Surgery at Hayes Medical Center today or online at greystonecosmetic.hayesmed.com.